Imagine your family single-handedly saving the world's greatest superpower from, like, total economic collapse.
Oh, yeah, total ruin.
Right. Your ancestor steps in, centralizes all the wealth, feeds the starving population during this massive global famine, and, sets up a system of prosperity that secures the whole nation for decades.
A literal national hero.
But then, imagine that just a few generations later, that same superpower completely erases your family's contributions from the historical record. I mean, just wipes it out, and then enslaves your children in mud pits.
It is a staggering shift.
It really is. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am thrilled you, the listener, are joining us today. We have a massive stack of sources on the table today, 2 extensive exegetical and theological essays analyzing a very specific, intense block of text.
Yeah, we are looking at Exodus chapter 1, specifically verses 8 through 14.
And our mission for this deep dive is to investigate that sharp historical transition of the Israelites, going from favored guests to brutally oppressed slaves.
But more than that, we are tracking the mechanism of divine providence.
Right.
We are going to look at how God orchestrates human tyranny to multiply a covenant people.
Because when you read this text, I mean, the whiplash is it's jarring. You go from a booming, prosperous family to an enslaved nation in a matter of, sentences.
Yeah, it happens so fast.
The text begins by echoing the creation mandate of Genesis chapter 1. The Israelites were fruitful, they swarmed, they multiplied, and they became exceedingly mighty.
The Hebrew text actually piles up those verbs of increase to create a sense of unstoppable, explosive growth.
Like they're just everywhere.
Yeah. The original family of Jacob, 70 people who came seeking refuge from a famine, had morphed into this massive demographic reality.
It is a total success story up until verse 8, which just drops like a thunderbolt.
Oh man, does it ever? Now there arose up a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph.
Boom, everything changes.
Everything. And to grasp the sheer shock of this transition, we have to look at the geopolitical landscape of the mid-15th century BC.
Right. The historical context is wild here.
By adhering to the 1446 BC date of the Exodus, the sources place this text right at the collision of 2 massive Egyptian dynasties.
Because during the era of Joseph, Egypt was ruled by a group known as the Hyksos, right?
Correct. The Hyksos were a line of foreign Semitic kings who had occupied the Delta region.
And because they were Semitic themselves, they were naturally sympathetic to other Semitic peoples arriving from Canaan.
Like the family of Jacob.
Which explains the warm welcome initially.
Absolutely.
I mean, if the ruling class shares your broad ethnic and cultural background, giving you prime real estate in the land of Goshen makes perfect political sense.
Yeah, you're adding friendly numbers to their base of supporters.
But the native Egyptians, they despised the Hyksos.
They hated them. They viewed them as illegitimate occupiers.
And the historical record shows that around 1550 BC, a native Egyptian named Ahmose I spearheaded a fierce nationalist revolution.
He successfully expelled the Hyksos, taking back the country and establishing the 18th dynasty.
Which ushered in what historians call the New Kingdom.
And that 18th dynasty brought a radically different political atmosphere.
I bet.
This new regime was fiercely nationalistic, highly militaristic, and intensely suspicious of any foreign populations remaining within their borders.
Which, makes sense. They had just fought a brutal war of liberation to get foreigners out of the capital.
Right. So the king mentioned in verse 8, likely a successor in this dynasty like Amenhotep I or Thutmose I, looks out at the expanding Hebrew population.
And sees a glaring demographic and military threat.
Yes. And we also have to consider the geography of where the Israelites actually lived.
Goshen.
Goshen, yeah. The Eastern Nile Delta, that was the frontier.
The borderland.
It was the sole gateway through which foreign armies from Asia could invade Egypt.
So if we look at this from the perspective of an insecure Egyptian superpower, hyper-focused on border security, the anxiety makes sense.
It's totally logical from their standpoint.
You have a hyper-nationalist regime, and right on their most vulnerable border sits a booming population of foreigners who used to be allied with the previous overthrown administration.
It is a recipe for state-sponsored paranoia.
I like to compare this sudden geopolitical shift to, a modern corporate hostile takeover.
Oh, that's a good way to frame it.
Yeah, imagine you work for a company where the old CEO loved your department. He funded you, gave you the best office space, everything.
You're the golden child.
But overnight, a new board takes over. They don't care about your past achievements.
They don't care at all.
They only see your department as a massive liability that needs to be liquidated or controlled.
And what stands out in the sources is how quickly human institutions suffer from this, well, this covenantal amnesia.
Right. Joseph saved Egypt from starvation.
He centralized the wealth of the ancient world into Pharaoh's hands. He basically built the economic engine of the state.
Yet within a few generations, his massive contributions are entirely erased from the state's working memory.
The regime changes, and the past is liquidated.
It really shows that the security of God's people can never rest upon political alliances.
Or historical gratitude.
Yeah, or secular contracts. The world will gladly benefit from the labor of the godly while systematically erasing their memory when it suits nationalistic goals.
And that erasure, it is highly deliberate.
It wasn't an accident.
No. When verse 8 says the new king did not know Joseph, we need to look at the Hebrew word used there, which is yada.
Yada.
Yeah. This is not about cognitive ignorance.
So it's not like the Egyptian royal archives just misplaced the files on the Grand Vizier who saved them from a 7-year famine.
Right. In the ancient Near East, yada carries a strict relational and legal weight.
Okay, so what does that look like practically?
Pharaoh is actively repudiating the legal status, the treaties, and the national debts owed to the house of Joseph.
Wow. So he is choosing an active, willful ignorance to justify his next administrative move.
Precisely. He is nullifying the contract.
He looks at his people and states the problem. The Israelites are too numerous.
And then he proposes his solution. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them.
Let us deal shrewdly. If we dig into that word shrewdly, which the sources identify as the Hebrew word hakam in the hithpale stem,
Yeah, how come?
it means to show oneself wise or to plot craftily.
Moses deliberately chose this word to highlight the clash between worldly secular wisdom and divine sovereignty.
Because Pharaoh believes he is executing a brilliant, pragmatic political strategy,
But he is operating on a fundamental scarcity mindset.
which is how the logic of the secular state often operates, entirely on that scarcity mindset.
Right. Pharaoh calculates that if a war breaks out, this massive population might ally with Egypt's enemies, fight against them, and then escape the land.
He does not want to lose them because they are a massive free labor force.
But he is terrified of their presence at the same time.
So, on paper, to a secular military strategist, this looks like standard national security protocol.
You control a high-risk population situated on a vulnerable border.
I mean, I want to clarify that Pharaoh isn't acting out of irrational madness, right? His fear is highly rational from a purely geopolitical standpoint.
Totally. He sees a massive, distinct group of foreigners sitting on his invasion route.
But the tragic irony is that he is terrified by the very things God is blessing.
Ah, that's such a good point.
He looks at the covenant fruitfulness of Israel, the visible, physical fact that God is keeping his promise to Abraham, and he interprets that divine blessing as a mortal threat.
Because worldly systems view the blessing of God upon his people as an inherent threat to their own hegemony.
It's like they can't tolerate it.
They can't.
Hmm.
Pharaoh's hakam, his shrewdness, is the exact secular wisdom that the Apostle Paul later brands as foolishness.
It is the foolishness of trying to outmaneuver the decrees of God.
Yeah, you just can't do it. And Pharaoh's plan to deal shrewdly with the Israelites quickly devolves.
It goes from a clever administrative strategy into state-sponsored brutality.
Very quickly. Egypt implements a massive system of forced labor.
Verse 11 tells us they set taskmasters over them to build the store cities of Pithom and Raamses.
And the Hebrew term for these taskmasters is serimisim.
Which translates to what, exactly?
It translates to captains of tribute or gangmasters.
Gangmasters. That paints a picture.
It does. And the original text uses very specific, violent terms to describe the nature of this labor.
Yeah, later in the chapter, we see the word perek.
Perek, which denotes a crushing severity or rigor that literally breaks the bones.
Breaks the bones. That physical detail brings the reality of the text out of the abstract and into the brutal heat of the ancient world.
It wasn't just tough work, it was lethal.
Right. And when I look at the physical labor described here, the word ana also stands out from the sources.
Yes, the sources highlight that this isn't just a descriptive word for, like, hard work.
Ana means to afflict, humble, or mistreat.
And this is the exact vocabulary God used with Abraham centuries prior in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, God told Abraham that his descendants would be strangers in a land not theirs, and they would be afflicted.
The presence of that specific word proves that the suffering in Egypt was a precisely orchestrated fulfillment of a sovereign decree.
It is not an accidental detour in the history of Israel.
It is a scheduled appointment.
A scheduled appointment that shows the absolute sovereignty of God over the darkest periods of human history.
Because to understand the gravity of the affliction, we have to look at the physical reality of ancient brickmaking.
It was horrific. This was toiling in the mud pits under the scorching Egyptian sun, driven constantly by the lash of the gangmasters.
It was a mechanism explicitly designed to wear down their physical strength.
To break their reproductive capacity.
And completely crush their spirit.
The goal was demographic control through physical exhaustion.
I noticed our sources make a deliberate point to contrast this text with modern sociological framework.
They do, yeah.
They bring up how a framework like critical race theory might read Exodus chapter 1 through the lens of universal class warfare.
Right, like the oppressed proletariat rising against the bourgeois oppressors in a Marxist struggle.
But the sources impartially note that the biblical text isolates this as a highly specific theological event.
It's regarding God's distinct covenant with national Israel.
Moses describes the Israelites as completely passive in this situation.
There is no underground resistance movement.
No armed rebellion.
No social activism campaigns.
Moses portrays them as passive sufferers under a crushing system to show that their eventual deliverance was entirely due to the monergistic intervention of God.
Monergism meaning that God acts alone to save.
The Israelites could not negotiate their way out.
The broken bones of Perek left them with zero physical energy to fight their way out.
They needed a deliverer to step in entirely from the outside.
The text points to a divine deliverance over human sociopolitical rebellion.
God's covenantal action is the focus, not human sociological theory.
And that narrative sets up the most staggering irony in the whole text.
Pharaoh threw the full weight of an ancient empire at Israel.
He used all his political might, his military taskmasters, his architectural projects to crush them.
And it completely backfired.
Completely. Verse 12 sits as the structural and theological center of the entire passage.
But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, the more they spread abroad.
Oppression leading to multiplication goes against every natural law of biology and sociology.
You cannot starve and beat a population into explosive growth.
You cannot, unless there is a divine catalyst at work.
We have to look at the Hebrew verb peretz, which is translated as to spread abroad.
It literally means to burst forth or to overflow.
Burst forth.
Yeah.
I love that imagery.
It establishes an immutable law of the divine kingdom. Earthly affliction acts as the exact catalyst for divine multiplication.
The enemy's weapon becomes the soil for growth.
Pharaoh's plan met God's promise, and God's promise prevailed.
Now, the text does not say affliction is painless.
No, it names the bitterness, honestly.
But it insists that God is sovereign over the results.
The Abrahamic promise continues right under the whip.
I think it operates like a massive hydraulic press or a concrete dam.
A dam is a great way to picture it.
Pharaoh keeps adding pressure to the water. He thinks if he just builds the walls higher and pushes the press down harder, he can compress the water into submission.
But water cannot be compressed.
The pressure just builds and builds until the pipes burst dramatically. That is peretz.
And not only does the dam burst, but the water ends up flooding the very fields Pharaoh was trying to protect.
The reaction of the Egyptians to this bursting forth is highly revealing too.
It is. When they saw their shrewd strategy failing, when they saw the Hebrew population bursting forth despite the crushing rigor, they did not pause to reflect.
They didn't acknowledge Israel's God.
The text says their reaction was weyakwatsu, a sickening, visceral dread and loathing.
Sickening dread.
Their hearts hardened. Their dread mutated into even more ruthless cruelty.
The sources use a classic theological phrase here. The same sun that melts wax hardens clay.
Unbelief does not become humble just because it witnesses the providence of God.
It often becomes vastly more hostile when confronted with the failure of its own control.
Absolutely.
Now think about this. If you are an Israelite hearing this history read aloud for the first time, you are likely standing in the hot sand of the Sinai Peninsula.
You are fresh out of Egypt.
Your feet are probably still calloused from the brick pits.
And the sources bring up the psychology of the Sinai generation, which really helps explain why Moses needed to tell them this specific story in this specific way.
This wilderness generation had spent their entire lives under the shadow of Egyptian supremacy.
They had developed a deeply ingrained slave mentality.
Whenever desert life got tough, they looked back fondly on the leeks, the onions, and the garlic of Egypt.
They romanticized their captivity, which required Moses to execute a total cognitive overhaul.
By repeatedly using words like perek, crushing rigor, Moses forces them to remember the actual horrors they were snatched from.
He is curing their sinful nostalgia.
He wants them to shudder at the memory of Egypt.
Furthermore, this was designed to foster a radical separation from the surrounding nations.
Moses is showing them that worldly systems operate by viewing God's blessing with a sickening dread.
Therefore, seeking alliances with those systems, trying to crawl back into the embrace of Egypt or cozy up to the Canaanites, violates their core covenant identity.
It is a brilliant pastoral strategy.
It really is.
Moses is essentially telling them not to romanticize their past abusers.
But it is incredibly difficult for a group of people whose entire identity for 400 years was wrapped up in being an underclass to suddenly view themselves as a chosen, distinct nation.
It requires a monumental shift in perspective.
Tying their suffering back to the sovereign timeline of God was an absolute necessity.
They needed to see their history not as a tragic accident or a failure of their God,
But as the precise execution of prophecy.
recognizing that God was in control the entire time, even in the mud pits, roots their faith in the absolute trustworthiness of divine prophecy.
It anchors their identity in covenant mercy, rather than their own physical strength or political savvy.
And the sources point out that this historical event creates a blueprint for the entire biblical narrative.
It points directly forward to larger cosmic realities.
The passage sets up a redemptive historical type that finds its fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
If we look at the New Testament, specifically Matthew chapter 2, we see a terrifying historical parallel.
A new king sits upon the throne of Judea Herod the Great.
He is a foreigner, an Idumean, who fears the birth of the king of the Jews.
The parallels are stark.
When Herod hears the news from the wise men, he adopts the exact strategy of Pharaoh.
He attempts to deal shrewdly.
He calculates the time of the star's appearance. He asks the religious leaders for the exact location.
And when his political craftiness fails, when he realizes the wise men have bypassed him, he resorts to raw, murderous violence.
Butchering the infant boys in Bethlehem.
It is the exact same spirit of the serpent trying to destroy the seed of the woman.
Matthew even explicitly quotes Hosea saying, "Out of Egypt have I called my son."
The connections are woven right into the text.
And the sources take this connection even further, linking the physical slavery in Egypt to the theological concept of total depravity.
Drawing on the Westminster Confession, the sources frame the natural human condition as being trapped in the mud pits of sin.
Completely unable to negotiate freedom.
We are slaves to a cruel, spiritual Pharaoh.
Jesus steps into this matrix as the ultimate afflicted one, as described in Isaiah chapter 53.
He does not bypass the crushing weight of the broken law.
He bears it entirely on the cross.
Just like Israel multiplying under the whip, we see the early church multiplying after the crucifixion.
Pharaoh's shrewdness is outmatched, just as the shrewdness of the crucifixion backfires on the kingdom of darkness.
The Roman Empire and the religious leaders thought they were dealing shrewdly with Jesus of Nazareth by executing him.
They thought they were eliminating a demographic and theological threat.
But that execution resulted in an explosive expansion of grace.
The very mechanism they used to try and silence the truth became the catalyst for its global multiplication.
By his resurrection, Christ broke the authority of the satanic Pharaoh,
Delivering his elect not from physical brickmaking, but from internal judgment.
Knowing that this ancient text points to a cosmic reality changes how we apply it today.
The sources offer a scathing critique of modern pragmatism and seeker-sensitive strategies in the modern church.
They argue that trying to win cultural approval by acting like the world is a dangerous compromise.
The world will always inherently view uncompromising truth with hostility.
Pharaoh's counsel sounded prudent to the Egyptians. Control a growing population, protect national security.
But prudence without righteousness is rebellion.
The sources make it clear that the church must beware of baptizing secular pragmatism as wisdom.
If a church or an individual is facing cultural marginalization and the surrounding culture says, "Come, let us deal shrewdly with them," the response should not be to water down the message to gain favor.
The sources unpack this by pointing to the doctrine of providence.
Citing the Westminster Confession's view of providence, specifically chapter 5, section 1.
The sources explain that God's sovereign decrees order everything from the smallest sparrow to the greatest empire.
When a new king arises in modern culture, when secularism marginalizes Christian principles, this is not a failure of God's plan.
It is often the very pressure used to refine and prepare the faithful.
God rules over the house of bondage just as surely as he rules over the promised land.
I want to push back on this concept of providence, though.
Sure.
It is very easy to read history or read a theological confession and say, trust providence.
Yeah, when it's on paper.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you are the one currently making bricks without straw, when you are dealing with a hostile workplace, a chronic illness, or severe cultural marginalization, how do you actually hold on to that?
It's hard.
When the taskmasters are real, the mud is thick, and the burdens are heavy, how does an individual maintain trust without falling into despair?
The text forces you to look at the fact that Israel was utterly unable to free themselves, yet the promise remained invincible.
The sources do not downplay the pain.
No, affliction is real, and it is bitter.
The text names the bitterness, honestly.
But it insists that affliction is not sovereign.
God is sovereign over the affliction.
You hold on by recognizing that the God who multiplied Israel under the whip is the same God governing your current trials.
The trials of the present age are the precise tools used to sanctify, to prune the dead branches, and to demonstrate divine strength.
The sources also draw a strong caution for anyone listening who holds a position of authority.
This is huge. Whether you are a parent, a boss, a manager, or a civic leader, do not become a Pharaoh.
Do not use your God-given authority to crush, control, or induce fear.
Authority is appointed for order and good, not for exploitation.
If you lead a team, do not treat your workers as disposable instruments.
If you lead a family, do not rule harshly.
The memory of the iron furnace should shape how justice is practiced by those who hold authority today.
Those who have been redeemed from bondage must never imitate the oppressor.
It is a vital ethical application drawn directly from the historical narrative.
This has been an incredibly heavy yet hopeful text to walk through.
It really is.
To synthesize our discussion, human cruelty and political shrewdness are loud.
Very loud.
Pharaoh makes a lot of noise. He builds massive cities. He issues terrifying decrees.
He utilizes the absolute peak of secular administrative authority.
But human shrewdness is consistently outmatched by the quiet, undeniable fulfillment of divine promises.
The loudest voice in the scene is Pharaoh's, but the strongest word is God's promise.
No earthly regime can overthrow the decrees of the Almighty.
Amen to that.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over.
Okay.
If the greatest periods of spiritual multiplication in history have come from the darkest iron furnaces of affliction, how might you need to reevaluate the heavy burdens currently in your own life?
That is a challenging question.
Are you viewing them as evidence of God's absence, or as the very pressure required to burst the dam of his promises? Thank you for taking this deep dive into the source material with us today.